President Trump is speaking at the White House later today on border security. And joining us now from the White House with more is Republican Senator from Georgia, David Perdue. We always say, because it's important, he's the only former CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, guys.
Let's start with why you're there. The president particularly wanted to have a meeting there, as I understand it, about ICE. ICE has come under a lot of criticism, we know, because of the separation of children from parents. From your point of view, we know that they do an awful lot of important, crucial work for us. Is there room for reform of ICE?
Well, any bureaucratic organization in the United States can do with some reform, of course. But let's remember what the mission is, and that's national security. So the men and women of ICE put their lives on the line every day. Even the Customs and Border Patrol people. I mean, you know, 1 million people a day cross our borders in one fashion or another. And the people of ICE, I mean, 90% of the people they detained last year were convicted of a crime. So, I mean, these people are now out to protect our personal and national security. So what we're here to do today is to call that out in a way that most people in America have not heard before. So I'm very delighted to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's a really important message, no question about it. Another report today actually came out of the president's fundraiser that he attended out in Southampton last Friday, in which reportedly he said that he was somewhat disappointed in Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, because he had expected him to be what he's called a cheap money guy. And in fact, he's raising rates. What do you think about what the Fed is doing with its rate-raising pattern?
Well, the rates were being raised much before Jay Powell was named and confirmed. You know, we've had 7 increases over the last 2 years, just shy of 2 years, 175 basis points. You know, we'll spend $50 billion more this year. The federal government will spend $50 billion more in interest payments alone this year than we did last year. And by 2023, unless we do something dramatic, we're going to be spending more on interest alone. That's if interest rates stay flat today. By 2023, we'll be spending more on interest than we are on our national defense. That's how bad this tragedy is. This is a crisis the president is now focused on. He wants to solve this debt crisis. He's been working on it the last year and a half by growing the economy. That's the first thing we had to do. The second, we now have a select committee that's trying to change this, the way we fund the government every year and eliminate continuing resolutions and these omnibuses that cause the expenses to go up every year. And we eventually have to save Social Security and Medicare, 2 of the biggest drivers of this debt crisis as we know it.
So, Senator, as a former businessman, former CEO, at what point do increased rates really start to cut into your profit margins, bearing in mind that we still have an interest rate that's below the rate of inflation, which is now up over 2?
Yeah, I mean, we're well below historic levels. I mean, for the last 50 years, the average is somewhere around 5.5%. If we were to get back to that level, we'd be spending $1 trillion on the federal debt in interest alone. So I still think we're in a very comfortable area relative to doing business. Look, the other part of this is the allocation of capital. Right now, we have capital formation that we have not seen in a decade. You know, $2 or $3 trillion will be coming back from overseas in unrepatriated profits, as you heard in your last segment. Already this year, the CBO tells us that we've had $1 trillion of U.S. profits repatriated from overseas. That leads to capital expenditures. That leads to new hires, salary increases, higher commitments to long-term retirement plans, and so forth. So this is part of what's coming that's going to generate continued growth that will help us with this debt crisis, and I think alleviate some of the need for higher interest rates. Now, we know if the economy gets overheated, we're going to see the Fed move, but we have such a demand internationally. If we can get exports up, I think that will buffer some of the inflationary pressures that you may be hearing otherwise.
How can we get exports up if we're confronted with more tariffs and a potential trade war?
Well, that's exactly what this president's trying to do. The reason you get into a trade war like this is to get exports up. I mean, we know that to grow the economy 3.5+%, as we hope to do, you've got to increase exports, and that means you have to have a level playing field. Look, we have a new free trade agreement with South Korea. Nobody ever thought that would happen. We may be weeks away from a new agreement with Mexico and Canada, with NAFTA. We have Europe, as you heard in your last segment, talking about 000, moving towards zero tariffs. So what we're getting is an end result that I think this president is going after, and that is equal access. We want a level playing field for our manufacturers, our ag producers, and all of our workers in America.
Senator, how are we coming along with the funding and spending bills? Of course, funding is going to run out, and the president has threatened to shut down the government over his border wall. Are we making good time right now?
Well, that's the reason I'm here in Washington today. I mean, the Senate will be in session later today. We wrote a letter, and 16 of us in the Republican Senate signed it, and asked the leadership to keep us here in August. The leadership decided they would do that. And what we're trying to do is there are two crises we have right now. One is funding the government. We've made 7 bills we've passed. Now, that's a record. I mean, over the last 44 years since the 74 Budget Act was put in place, Sherry, we've only averaged 2.5 bills passed per year to fund the government. You need to pass 12.
Right.
So we've got a lot of work to do, and the reason we're here in August is to try to get these other bills funded. We have 2 bills coming up this week. We have the defense bill and HHS.
Right.
And these are critical bills because this funds our military and does some of the domestic work that the Democrats want.
And as we know, August in Washington is hard duty. Thank you so much, Senator, for spending some time with us today. It's Senator David Perdue from the great state of Georgia. And